Good evening. I'm Mark Latham, and I'm on the faculty of Vermont Law School. I want to welcome you to another of our embedded racism series, where throughout the summer, we've been exploring a variety of issues related to race and justice in light of the death of George Floyd and others. Thank you for joining us tonight. I must give a shout out to Dean Shirley Jefferson. For those of you who know this remarkable woman, we know her story and how she's been fighting for the causes of justice and equality since she was a little girl in Selma, Alabama. I'm very fortunate to call Dean J not only my colleague, but also my friend. This series was her idea, and I want to express my gratitude to her for conceiving of this series and for asking us to participate. I should also thank Teresa Johnson, Emily Potts, Mariana Munez, and Ashley Zia for their assistance in making tonight happen. There have been calls for police reform for as long as I can remember. I grew up in Chicago and recall the 1968 Democratic Convention and the reaction of the Chicago Police Department to the largely protests that were peaceful in Lincoln Park and Grant Park and the calls for reform that followed. The cries to reform the police have intensified since then, and particularly so during the past several years in response to the deaths of African Americans by the police, including Michael Brown, Eric Garner, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, a list that is by no means exhaustive. Among the latest calls for police reform, questions about qualified immunity have surged to the forefront. So this evening, that's what we're going to explore: the doctrine of qualified immunity, what it is, the arguments for it, the arguments against it, why it has become part of the police reform dialogue, and what might happen if it were eliminated or scaled back in some fashion, as Senator Sanders has recently proposed. To help us explore this important topic, we are privileged to have with us this evening 3 members of the Vermont law enforcement community. Each of these individuals are very capable, very experienced, and each have devoted their professional lives to serving and protecting the public. And I should add that while they have worked together, each is from a different law enforcement agency, which will tell us a little bit about tonight. First, we have Colonel Matthew Birmingham from the Vermont State Police. Hi, Matt. Then Sheriff Bill Bohnyak, the Orange County Sheriff, followed by Loretta Stalnaker, Chief of Police for South Royalton. Before I explore or do an overview of qualified immunity, beginning with you, Colonel Birmingham, tell us a little bit about the Vermont State Police and your role with it.
Great.
Oh, no.
So the Vermont State Police is the largest law enforcement agency in the state of Vermont. It comprises of approximately 300 plus sworn members and then another 50 civilian members throughout the state. There are 10 state police barracks around the state, and the state police is divided into 3 divisions. There's the Field Force Division, which includes all of our Field Force troopers, which are the uniformed troopers you see out on the road. We have our Criminal Division, which is all of our detectives. They focus on larger criminal investigations and homicides. And larger criminal investigations that require more time and resources. And we have our Support Services Division, which encompasses our Fair and Impartial Policing Director, our Internal Affairs, and our Office of Professional Development, which helps, to train, recruit, hire, and improve upon our working conditions. So those 3 divisions make up the entire state police. Not everybody in the state police works in uniform in a cruiser. There's many plainclothes detectives and specialized units across the state. The state police covers as a primary jurisdiction almost 200 towns in Vermont and almost half the population of Vermont. So we are the frontline first response law enforcement agency for many Vermonters. We have been involved in fair and impartial policing practices for a decade or more in ensuring that, part of our strategic goals and missions are to ensure that we are engaged in our communities, that we are ahead of the curve on fair and impartial policing practices. We've been collecting race data for almost a decade, long before it was the law of the land. We have been building relationships for many years, not just with communities of color, but marginalized communities around the state. We have a captain devoted to, who is a fair and impartial policing director for the state police. That is their role. They're the director of fair and impartial policing and community affairs. So it is something that is in the fabric of the state police. It begins when we recruit new troopers throughout their entire career, their training, their promotional process, and we pride ourselves on that and ensuring that that we have that dialogue with the communities. We have probably the oldest fair and impartial policing committee that it makes up a diverse group of community members that meets quarterly with state police command staff. And that's been going on for almost 10 years as well, that dialogue between the community and the state police as it relates to race data, policy development, training. And so it's been incredibly helpful for the command staff moving forward as we progress and learn and try and improve upon the services we provide to Vermonters. So that's the long and short of it.
Well,
I will stop there because I know I have a time frame.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Sheriff Bill.
Well, good evening, everyone. Yeah, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, I've been sheriff for 14 years here in Orange County, and we have grown from, in 14 years, from 2 full-time people to 10 full-time officers with 15 part-time people. We have 2 full-time detectives that investigate sex crimes against primarily children, but also adults. We have 4 deputies dedicated to patrols throughout Orange County. We also provide court security. We do all the prisoner transports. We're nowhere near what the state police is by any means. And the state police help us out on major crimes. So, but we do domestic violence cases, vandalism, burglaries, and so we're a full service organization, and we try to be as proactive as possible, get out into communities, doing community policing. So, our vision, we've been, working with the community members on many different fronts, everything from prevention partnerships, to diversion, and several other, we work with our local Rotary clubs, and I'll leave it there for now. So.
Well, thank you, Sheriff. And then Chief Loretta Stalnaker, who's was kind enough in the spring to join me in my use of force course 1 class, and spent the afternoon answering a lot of questions from students. So welcome, Chief.
Thank you for having me tonight. So Royalton Police Department is a municipal department. We have 2 full-time officers, 3 part-time officers, and we cover the full town of Royalton, which also includes the law school. The PD has been here approximately 10 years, maybe a little bit less. When we're not on duty, the state police does cover for us. But we are not a full-time police department to cover 24/7. But we do, pretty much everything except for major crimes, which we would call the state police in to assist us with. My main motto since I've been here has been community policing. I enjoy going to the schools, the law school too, things like that. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. So what everyone knows, the plan for this evening is to first I'll start with a brief overview. I'll try to keep it brief of qualified immunity. Then I've got a couple of questions for Matt and Bill and Loretta. And then we'll open it up to the floor for questions that the audience may have. Now, in order to do that, You'll have to use the chat function, and we will try as best as we can this evening within our time limits to respond to your questions before we close. So thanks again. So what is qualified immunity? Well, one of the courses I teach at Vermont Law School is tort law, and it basically provides a civil remedy for injuries that we may suffer due to someone's negligence. So for example, if I were driving my car and I wasn't paying attention and I hit you with my car, you could sue me under tort law for my negligence and obtain a award of money or damages due to my negligent driving. Well, similarly, government officials, including police officers, can face civil suits seeking monetary damages for injuries that they may cause while performing their official duties. If you change the hypothetical I just mentioned, where I was negligently driving and make me a police officer, I pull you over for a routine traffic stop and for no good reason drag you out of the car, tase you several times, and leave you dazed and confused on the roadside. You'd probably consider suing me as a result. In this regard, there's a federal law that was enacted shortly after the Civil War, which is referred to as Section 1983. This federal law authorizes civil suits for monetary damages against any person acting under the color of law to deprive a person of rights guaranteed by the Constitution or by another law. Since I tased you for no good reason, in addition to likely criminal charges and department disciplinary actions such as termination, you could sue me under Section 1983 and seek monetary damages as well. The qualified immunity provides a defense from such suits so long as the actions by the government officials, such as the police, did not violate clearly established law. So my lawyer would likely raise qualified immunity as a defense in response to a suit in an effort to have it dismissed well before it ever made to trial. Now, the doctrine of qualified immunity was recognized as we know it today about 40 years ago by the Supreme Court in a case titled Harlow v. Fitzgerald. The Harlow case had nothing to do with police misconduct or excessive use of force, but involved a dispute that arose when Ernest Fitzgerald alleged that the defendants, who were aides of President Nixon, had conspired along with President Nixon to wrongfully discharge him from his position with the Department of the Air Force. The aides took the position that they had absolute immunity from this lawsuit and the court should dismiss the suit. Well, it eventually made its way up to the Supreme Court, and it found that while absolute immunity did not apply to the aides' actions, that they were entitled to something called qualified immunity. And in justifying qualified immunity, the Supreme Court and others offered several reasons for this new doctrine. First, that suits against public officials impose significant costs upon society, including the expenses of litigation. Secondly, that lawsuits diverted the attention of officials from performing their public duties. Third, that the threats of suits deterred individuals from seeking public office. And fourth, suits could result in financial ruin for legitimate errors in judgment. And justification, which is often asserted for why this doctrine should apply to police, is that the police have to make oftentimes split-second decisions without the benefit of time to deliberate or time to weigh the pros and cons. And if errors in judgment are made as a result of this due to unfair Monday morning quarterbacking of decisions that were made in the heat of the moment, it would be unfair to impose liability. Since recognition in Harlow v. Fitzgerald, qualified immunity has become a very difficult defense to overcome for those who seek damages from police for allegations of excessive force. A study published by Reuters News in June of this year analyzed hundreds of qualified immunity cases from 2015 to 2019 and concluded that in more than half of the cases, the courts granted the qualified immunity defense and dismissed the complaint. So why is it such a potent defense to overcome? Well, in large part because today, a case asserting that a police officer used excessive force hinges almost entirely on how a court construes the issue of whether the law was violated was clearly established. When it comes to the Supreme Court, over the last 20 years, very few cases have they found that the defense didn't apply. By far, when cases addressing qualified immunity or raising qualified immunity made to the Supreme Court, they have almost uniformly found in favor of the officers or the defendants. And thus the defense acted as a complete shield to the claims of excessive force. So how might this work in the hypothetical suit that was filed against Officer Latham when I pulled the driver out of her car, tased her, left her dazed and confused on the roadside? Well, there is a qualified immunity case from about 10 years ago with essentially the very same facts, called Brooks v. City of Seattle. A woman named Malika Brooks was driving her 11-year-old son to school one morning in Seattle, and she was pulled over for speeding just before she got to the school. Long story short, Brooks, who was also 7 months pregnant, refused to sign the speeding ticket, and she refused to get out of the car. An officer decided to tase her multiple times, and then she was forcibly removed from her car, handcuffed, and arrested. Brooks later sued the city of Seattle, its chief of police, and 3 of the officers who were involved under Section 1983, and also raised common law claims of negligence, assault, and battery. A majority of the Ninth Circuit, following a hearing en banc, concluded that although a jury could find that her Fourth Amendment rights were violated, that the law involving the use of tasers under such circumstances wasn't so clearly established, and so she couldn't show at the time of the alleged violation that a clearly established law at the time of the incident would have prohibited such conduct by the officers. Therefore, her case was dismissed. Critics point to such cases as Brooks v. City of Seattle, among others, to assert that the 40-year-old defense shields the police from accountability. It is not well founded in the law and was beyond the power of the Supreme Court to establish back in the 1960s. So it is for these reasons that qualified immunity has now become part of the reform the police conversation. And I'll conclude by noting that the Speaker of the House has said that ending qualified immunity is one of the top priorities for Democrats. And indeed, there are multiple bills have been introduced in each chamber that propose to end qualified immunity. While President Trump, unsurprisingly, has replied that ending qualified immunity is a non-starter as far as he's concerned. So I'll begin with Matt. What are your thoughts on qualified immunity? Do you view it as essential in your role as a law enforcement officer?
Yeah, I think it's obviously I'm not an attorney, so I thought your explanation was good. And so the legal definition of it is a little bit complicated for me, but I can tell you that what's important to keep in mind is that qualified immunity is not just for police officers. It's for, if I'm not mistaken, all at least executive branch government officials. So it's important that we recognize that the police are not the only ones who enjoy qualified immunity. The other issue is too, and you made this point, which is important to remember, it may provide, and I'm obviously not familiar with the case law that you are, but it may provide a shield. But if you are outside acceptable boundaries, either the law, policy, or you are acting negligently, it does not shield you. So I think there are some misconceptions that it provides a lot more protection than it does. Now, with that said, you did hit an important point that I was going to bring up, that policing is a high-risk profession, and it is one in which there are decisions that are made, life and death decisions that are made in a split second. And the police are not always right when they make those decisions. And I think that anybody who comes into this profession, especially if they're acting in good faith and within the law and within policy, do their best to diffuse a situation or to manage a situation and something bad ends up happening. I think it will be a struggle and a challenge to find good people that would want to put themselves in a position where they would be personally financially responsible and possibly financially ruined if something like that happened. Now, so can I say that people would run to the exit if there wasn't qualified immunity? I have no idea. I can tell you that's a concern. My concern is that we would lose potentially really good police officers. And so what's important to understand is that, you know, especially as a leader of an organization, you know, and you mentioned this, Professor, in your opening, if somebody is breaking the law or operating outside of policy, they're at least for the state police, I can tell you, they will be charged criminally, and there will be disciplinary action taken against them as well, up to and possibly including termination if they acted, you know, in that regard, that it was a fireable offense. So there are many other, and then now we have Act 56, which is a decertification law that allows the Criminal Justice Training Council to decertify police officers for certain criteria. So I can say that, you know, being the director of the state police, I'm named in many lawsuits that I have nothing to do with, just given my position as the director. As you mentioned, the chief was sued in that situation in Seattle. And I would be very uneasy being in this position, being sued because of my position and not having some protections in place to protect my personal situation, especially if it's just given that it's because I'm in this position. So, you know, to answer your question, I think it's an important part of government service. I think most government employees are trying to do their best, and really are here for the right reasons. And it would be difficult and challenging to put them in a situation where they do either make a mistake or try their best and something bad happens, and they could be sued and lose their livelihood.
Yeah, and I have to say, too, for me, one of probably the most compelling reason to have qualified immunity for police officers is the point you raised about the need sometimes to make just a split-second life and death decision, which is unfortunately a you know, goes hand in hand with the job. And would we really want to hold police officers financially liable for, you know, honest mistakes in judgment that could arise when they are forced to make a split-second decision, again, without the benefit of being able to really think it through, or, you know, weigh the pros and cons, or go to consult with a colleague, as happens in other professions usually. And I also want to point out, too, to remind everyone that qualified immunity is not a defense to criminal charges that an officer may face. For example, in my hypothetical where I drag somebody out of their car and tase them, I would likely be prosecuted and could not assert qualified immunity as a defense to the charges that the state's attorney or attorney general's office brought. Chief Stallneck, anything you want to add about qualified immunity? I mean, do you think it's important, or is something that is part of the efforts to reform the police we could possibly do without?
I certainly think it's important. I think another point that we need to make is that if we don't have that qualified immunity, it could be a safety issue as well for us and the public. If we hesitate in our jobs, somebody's likely to get hurt, or we're likely to get hurt, and nobody wants that. We obviously have bad apples in our jobs. We combat that with good training, having good qualified applicants, things like that. But I think taking qualified immunity away is, you know, not the way to go. You know, but like the colonel said, you know, I have to agree with him on all his points as well.
Bill, you want to add anything on qualified immunity?
Sure. I look at this as with what Matt and Loretta saying, looking at it as like a two-pronged test. On one hand, making sure, you know, you have to look at the facts and circumstances of an incident and what has taken place. And then on the other end of it, was there something that the officer did, exactly what your scenario about the tasing? You know, or a person's handcuffed and you decide, well, I'm going to give that person an extra few smacks in the head for the hell of it. Well, that's, completely wrong. And so if we determine that there's a known violation of the officer's conduct, what they're doing, sure, we need to take care of that. Or in my case, I don't have the colonel has a union to deal with. I don't. And if I determine someone is not acting in good faith, I'll terminate them immediately. I wouldn't tolerate it. So, qualified immunity is very important because we do make those split-second decisions. And if we're just dealing with the facts and circumstances at the time, something we may not known that could have changed our decision, and we acted in good faith. So that's why qualified immunity is important.
Well, Bill, I'll follow up with your remarks. With what is your response then to those who argue that with qualified immunity there's little, if any, accountability for the police who may use excessive force or otherwise violate their positions of trust and authority? For instance, what would you say to those advocates of abolishing qualified immunity?
Well, that's where the trust and accountability, transparency is very important. And when there's an incident, especially when it comes out into the public eye, it's a high-profile case. We need to get all the facts, circumstances, everything out to the public transparently. Because if we don't, then they're going to say, well, you're hiding something, or so it's important to build that community trust. And also with having that community oversight within your agency. Do I have a community oversight right now? I do not. But that's something that behind the scenes we are working on. And I actually got one of our representatives, Representative Peter Reed, who was actually just sent me an email. He'd like to be a part of it. So the public trust, it's very important. If you don't have that in your community, to me, ever since I've been in law enforcement for many years, and I always said, it's better to be a part of the community than apart from it. So the community trust overall is very important. So I'll leave it right there.
Yeah. And obviously I'm not a law enforcement professional, but it does seem to me that that the calls to abolish qualified immunity in part are driven by a deepening sense of mistrust among the public towards the police. As you put it, Bill, if trust weren't an issue, maybe there wouldn't be calls to abolish qualified immunity. But Loretta, a question for you as a follow-up to what Bill said. If someone who's under your charge is alleged to use excessive force, what happens? What is the process? And most important in terms of trust between the public and law enforcement, why should members of the public have confidence in the results of the process that you have in place where you're investigating, again, a claim of excessive use of force? So sort of a three-part question.
So,
what is the process?
So the process would be that person would go on to administrative leave until an investigation was done. The investigation, and it can be done a number of ways, and it's different for every department. So I would probably ask the state police to assist me in doing, just so that there's a second party involved with that. I don't have a community panel currently. as Bill and after Bill said that, it's a great idea, and I actually I'm going to look into doing that. But every witness would be interviewed, the victim or the complainant, because not necessarily all victims complain, but some others might complain for them. But so a full-scale investigation, we'd be very transparent, in what we were doing. It's very important that, for me to keep my public's trust, my community's trust. I think I've done a very good job of that and being open to the public and to the community. So I definitely wouldn't want to damage that. So that would be it. We don't have a strict policy on that, but that's the way that I would lead that.
Matt, what about the state police? Same question. One of your, out of all your officers, one gets a complaint that they've used excessive force. What is a process and following up on that complaint?
So the state police is unique in that our internal affairs process is governed by state statute. So we're the only law enforcement agency that has a statute governing our internal affairs disciplinary process. And what it does is it establishes an Office of Internal Affairs that answers directly to the Commissioner of Public Safety. That Office of Internal Affairs conducts investigations. The Commissioner of Public Safety, who is a civilian appointee of the administration, is the only one in the agency that has the authority to discipline and fire employees. So it's removed from sworn officers making those decisions. So the colonel, the director, myself, I don't have the statutory authority to discipline or fire employees. The commissioner does. So that's one step removed from the sworn members. The commissioner has the sole discretion and authority to open an internal affairs investigation based on the allegations. It's a civil investigation, so you don't need a lot to open one. It's an employment investigation is what it is. It's conducted by a state police lieutenant, and then the results are submitted to the commissioner, and ultimately, and he will make a decision, or she, whoever's in that position, will make a decision based on a lot of factors, and we're dealing with employment law, so there's a lot of things that must be considered. But more importantly, the statute creates what's known as the State Police Advisory Commission, of which Dean Jefferson sits on for the state police. It is a commission appointed by the governor of citizens to oversee the internal affairs process and guide and advise the Commissioner of Public Safety in many different facets. One of their biggest ones is discipline and internal affairs findings. So they meet quarterly, and they meet with the commissioner, and they review every single internal affairs investigation. And these are citizens from across Vermont. Like I said, Dean Jefferson sits on SPAC, and they review. SPAC has the statutory authority to release any and all facts or findings from an internal affairs investigation. So SPAC can open up any internal affairs investigation to the public that they deem necessary. They don't obviously have the power to discipline. That rests with the commissioner, but he consults with SPAC on his findings. So it's a very structured process for the state police. Again, it's a statutory. It's established in law, and it's been in effect for more than 30 years at this point. I think could be even longer than that. It's a very mature process. Can we do better in transparency with it because it is deemed confidential by statute, the findings, unless SPAC determines it should be public. Of course we can. And I agree with both the chief and the sheriff on this, that in order to be effective as a law enforcement agency, you must have trust and confidence of the people. I mean, there's no other way to do it in a democracy. And if you don't, then that's problematic. So the first step in that is transparency and ensuring that the public understands everything that the police are doing and why they're doing them. Where it gets complicated, and some people won't agree with this, is there are statutes and laws and personnel laws that protect employees at times on certain things. and it can sometimes be an impediment to transparency. The Commissioner of Public Safety, along with the executive law enforcement leaders across the state, have developed, and including the state police, a 10-point reform plan in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy that pushes 10 reform measures for law enforcement in Vermont. And one of them is more and greater transparency amongst discipline for law enforcement officers, and a more formalized process across the state for everyone. So, you know, I'm in support of that reform plan. I don't know what the outcome is of it, because it's still being vetted and reviewed by our community partners right now, so that they have a say in the process of what the reform should look like. But that's a long answer to your question, and I just wanted to make sure I got all that in there. But in the end, the commissioner would review the internal affairs investigation, make a determination whether or not a trooper who used excessive force would be fired or disciplined.
And then I would imagine that for all of you, the range of that there's a range of sanctions that could be imposed, ranging from some type of I don't know, a hearing to termination to referral to the attorney general or the state prosecutor or the county prosecutor for criminal prosecution, depending again on what the violation is. Matt, since you're the only,
if I could, Professor. On that point, I just want to make it's a very important point you brought up. Any criminal allegation against a member of the state police, the governor and the attorney general and the state's attorney in the jurisdiction are immediately notified in writing of that allegation. There is a criminal investigation that immediately ensues, and it takes precedent over the internal affairs investigation. So it's an important point. That if there are criminal allegations, we do not handle that internally. It is done as any other criminal investigations conducted, and the attorney general, the governor, and the state's attorney are immediately notified.
Well, thanks for the.
And I'm sorry, you were about to ask a question.
Oh yes, so I think you're the only representative of a law enforcement agency with us today who also has a union. So a follow-up question is, what role does the union play in the investigation? And has the union that the state police belong to, have they issued any kind of statement about qualified immunity?
I do not know if they've issued a statement. I don't remember seeing one. It is, and yes, you are correct. We have what's known as the Vermont Troopers Association. It's a union representing troopers and sergeants, and that troopers that hold the rank of trooper and sergeant. And then VSEA, through the supervisory unit, represents lieutenants, anyone holding the rank of lieutenant. So those are our frontline managers, and then captains and majors and the colonel are all managers. So the role that they play is important. They represent their membership. They have a collective bargaining agreement that lays out the rules governing discipline of state police members. They represent their members. They have attorneys that are involved in the process. We have an incredible relationship with our union. Their leadership is very progressive in their thinking. They're very intelligent, and they don't want bad apples in the state police as much as we do. So they recognize how important it is to hold members accountable. They're very reasonable, but they will represent their members accordingly, and as they are entitled to do, and their membership is entitled to receive that representation. So there is a process. It is, like I said earlier, it's well established. The union will represent any trooper that's disciplined or terminated. If they want to appeal to the labor board, that is their right on any discipline in the state. And so they can appeal to the labor board, and the labor board will make a final determination on any discipline that is issued by the commissioner.
Well, thank you. And let's turn to, I'm going to turn to the audience questions, unless there's any remarks either of any of you want to make before we do that. Any additional comments about qualified immunity? Yeah, Bill.
It's not really with qualified immunity, but what the colonel pointed out about this 10-point plan that the Commissioner of Public Safety, Commissioner Sherling, came out with. That was a collaboration between the Vermont State Police, the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs of Police, and I believe it even has I'm 99% sure I even heard that the Troopers Association was endorsing this 10-point plan, and it's going to be taken up piece by piece by our Senate Gov Ops, starting back in the end of August when they reconvene. So even though I'll give you a quick example. Locally, I changed my use of force policy. I listened to the public. I actually worked with a citizen, and we modified our use of force policy to bring out de-escalation, and any use of force is reported. So even though I modified my use of force policy, there's going to be changes on a statewide level. Like right now, the fair and impartial policing, it's pretty much statewide, a universal policy. And I think you're going to see other policies on a statewide level just being pushed out. So we may have our individual policies in our departments and on some of the major components of this, use of force, fair and impartial policing. We're going to see statewide policies take place. That's coming. That's going to happen. The other thing, the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council has a couple new partners. The ACLU is now part of it, and also not Migrant Justice, but
Human Rights Commission.
Human Rights Commission. Thank you. So, and they left a little wording in there about and others that may deem necessary. So it's on a statewide level, we're seeing some major changes. So it's going to be interesting the next few years here in law enforcement. But thank you for the opportunity.
There'll be a lot of legislation and new policies. But yeah, you mentioned something that is really gotten a lot of press, and that's the use of force policies that various departments have. And in fact, I know that California, in response to a very controversial shooting involving the Sacramento police a year or so ago, that the California legislature adopted a new law about when officers throughout the state were entitled to use deadly force. Revising or amending use of force policies is truly, I think, at the forefront of the calls to reform police. And a lot of, or at least some changes have been made in some departments, such as expressly banning chokeholds and other potentially uses of deadly force only when absolutely necessary. Well, thank you. So let's go over questions. So can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So the first question, do you think there would be less mistrust around police or qualified immunity if there were more diversity within the force? Is the screening process, if the screening process was not one that led to the disqualification of people of color who do apply, who would like to tackle that question? Basically asking whether diversity within the force would result in greater trust between the public and police.
I mean, I can tackle that, and the answer is yes. I mean, it is one of our top priorities as part of our strategic goals is to diversify the state police, and we are working very hard to do that. And you know, it's a challenge when a certain percentage of your applicants are people of color, and it's a low percentage. There's just not a lot to choose from. So we've really focused hard over the years. We work very closely with Curtis Reed, the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, and we've worked really hard to bolster our recruiting efforts of people of color. And all sorts of different backgrounds of people. And we've gone out of state. We've gone to historically Black colleges to recruit. And we're trying very hard to diversify our workforce. And there is no question about it that a more diverse workforce is a better and stronger workforce, and builds relationships with with whatever communities they may come from into the law enforcement. We just hired a Sudanese American who's in the United States now, and I had a really good talk with him the other day, and he never thought about law enforcement as a career, but now that he's going to be a state trooper, we talked long and hard about how to recruit more people from his community, and he said, listen, once I put on this uniform and I go back to my community and show them and talk to them about what being a state trooper is all about, that is going to open up a door in that community to help us recruit further and build trust with that community. So without question, it's important. It's very challenging. I wish it were easier to do than it sounds, but it's very challenging. But we're working very hard at it, and I've told the Fair and Impartial Policing Committee. I've told anybody that wants to speak up, if you have ideas to help not just the state police, all law enforcement in Vermont, diversify their workforce, I am all ears. I want to hear any idea that there is out there.
Well, Matt, you may not know this off the top of your head, but I'm curious because, truth be told, I have met one African American state trooper in Vermont in the 15 years I've lived here. But I'm just curious, do you know how many troopers of color are part of your force?
Well, we have, it fluctuates. One left. I think we only have 4 at this point. And people identify differently. We don't ask necessarily, we would like people when we're recruiting and hiring to identify for us so that we can keep track, and mostly so we can keep track in the hiring process, because there's a lot of concern around the testing and the written exam, and we need to make sure that it's fair and equitable for everyone. So our numbers are very low. There's no two ways about it. It's not where we want to be, both for race and for gender. We're working very hard to hire more women because we're at about 12%, which is higher than any other state police agency in New England, but it's still not representative of the community. So we're trying very hard to open these doors, and the key is getting them to the applicant table. It's not necessarily hiring them, because of all the applicants, the last I checked, I think 7% are women. So if you're trying to get to 50% women in your workforce and 7% of your applicants are women, those numbers don't add up. They're just not going to connect.
Yeah, the math doesn't work.
The math does not work.
Yeah.
And so we have to be better at recruiting people who ordinarily would not get into law enforcement, into this profession, and quite honestly, into Vermont. We've got to, we do heavy recruiting out of state, and we've got to sell not just law enforcement as a career, but Vermont as a place to live. And Curtis has been very helpful in that regard in trying to open those doors. But without the numbers of people coming in and applying and actually filling out an application, it's hard to do. So I'll stop. I'm sorry. I'll let the other two jump in.
Loretta, Bill, anything on you want to add?
I agree with Matt. It's I've been with the Sheriff's Department now for 24 years, roughly 25 years. And in that time, 2 Asians that were hired, no Black applicants, there's 0 applicants. And currently we have 4 women working for us. So we'd love to see more, diverse people coming up from down country, and it's the same with our dispatch. Our dispatch right now, it's primarily women that fill a position. So, and we are hiring, so I'd welcome any applications, any diversity we could bring in. Absolutely.
So you got to get the word out. Chief, I must admit, you're the first woman chief of police I've ever met. Any thoughts you may have on diversity?
There's actually 3 women chiefs in the state. One's an acting chief. Burlington is looking for a full-time chief. But yes, there's 3 of us, and just Montpelier just hired an African American chief. So I believe he's probably the only one in the state. I'm not sure about that, but so you know, a lot of the problem too is that we're finding is just in general, our numbers of people applying. Almost every department that around, I know state police is short. None of us are getting the applicants that we used to. Is that a good, I mean, you know, it's not a good thing, but it certainly changes the pool of people that we have for the jobs. And I think that makes a difference too. So anybody out there want to apply? Go ahead, Mark.
I would imagine too that given the public sentiment toward the police right now, which I personally think is unfortunate, I would imagine that makes hiring even more of a challenge for you, because I do agree with I think it's presupposed in the question, the notion that if you have a police force that looks like that's reflective of the population, there'll be greater opportunities to perform community policing and fewer opportunities of misunderstanding and mistrust that have taken place. Let's turn to well, thank you. The next question. So if police officers have to make split-second decisions under conditions of danger and uncertainty, how can they be expected to engage in careful reasoning and equal treatment instead of being led by implicit bias and underlying determinations of what type of citizen should be granted the benefit of the doubt? If anyone wants to speak to that question.
Say right.
I mean, I can say that. Go ahead, Bill. You start.
I was just going to say that's where the training and education comes in. That's very important, because I drill it into all the deputies all the time. No matter what's going on in the world around us, follow your training, because if you follow your training, that's going to keep you from getting in trouble. It's where you deviate from that. You let your emotions get the best of you. You just need to really follow your training. And that's where the education and training piece of the deputies of all law enforcement is very important. Especially when it comes to use of force. I think you're going to see a proposal coming out on the statewide level to increase the use of force training. Because right now, I think it's a minimum of 4 hours a year once you're certified. So some proposals are 4 hours, maybe a quarter. Just so we're making sure that if we are using the use of force, it's done right, properly, and you're following your training guidelines. Colonel?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Training both in use of force, but also training in de-escalation and in cultural awareness are essential. And we, the police in general, have to do better at assuring that we increase all training in implicit bias training. The state police has been doing implicit bias training for years, and understanding what implicit bias is, understanding that humans have biases, regardless, it's a human function, but that in law enforcement, it's essential that you acknowledge those biases and don't let them cloud your professional judgment. We have to train on that. We have to train on de-escalation. The police need to be better at not using force instead of using it and learning how to do it well. So there are, of the 115,000 interactions the state police has with the public every year, there's about 200 incidents where use of force is necessary. And that's everything from people not wanting to be handcuffed to lethal force. So the numbers are incredibly small, and there is a dashboard that the state police has online that people can see those incidents of use of force. And I want it to get smaller. We should be smaller in the number of use of force incidents we have. Unfortunately, there are situations that require force. It's just a part of the job. We will continue to work hard and do our best to reduce those numbers. But that's a small percentage, though. 200 out of 115,000 encounters is a very small percentage. So we have to work very hard at ensuring de-escalation, cultural awareness, implicit bias, and doing better at not using force. But when we do use it, using it the way it's intended to be used. So I couldn't agree more with the sheriff that your training is essential. The law enforcement training is very important. And hiring, I've done, screening people. That's why, it makes me nervous because, Professor, you said it. It's a profession now that people don't want to get into for a variety of reasons that we all know. They're very obvious. And what worries me when you talk about even further eroding protections like qualified immunity or defunding police, it puts police in a very difficult situation because then you're dealing with an applicant pool of people that should not be police officers. And it almost is a catch-22.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22 where we have to the police have to be better, no question about it. The reforms have to come, no question about it. But if we erode the profession of law enforcement to a level where good people who are highly educated and intelligent and use their brain and have cultural awareness and want to do this for the right reasons don't want to apply anymore, we still have to hire people. And we will end up, unfortunately, hiring people that should not be hired. And they will likely do things like use excessive force and create a bigger problem for law enforcement. So it's
right. And then you end up in sort of this vicious cycle of further increase in mistrust,
erosion. It's a further erosion of trust. It's a further erosion of the profession. And so, when people ask me about defunding, and I know this is more about qualified immunity, I respond by saying, well, what we really need to do is reinvest in the police. We need to reinvest more training, more changing hiring practices, changing promotional practices. And if we divest from the police, all that's going to go away. And all the important things that we need the police to do are going to go away. And it will be just a response unit that will go to emergencies and with no training. And that scares me, and it should scare the public. We need to be investing more and doing more.
It scares me too. Chief Stalnaker, anything you would like to add?
I just have to agree with the colonel and the sheriff. Training is so important. Education, community policing is important, and I know that BSP doesn't have a lot of time sometimes because they have such a wide coverage area. But getting out into the public and being seen and meeting your people, it helps to erode those biases that we might have. I know I walk around town all the time, say hi to everybody. I go to the law school. I have lunch sometimes. I've had lunch with Shirley, Dean Jefferson a couple times. Just get out there and be with the community helps as well. But training and education are where it's going to be at. That's the only way we're going to be able to change. And obviously hiring practices.
So here's a question. What conversations occur within your organizations when a national incident occurs involving law enforcement, such as the murder of George Floyd? Surely that must generate a fair amount of conversation among you and your colleagues.
A tremendous amount. Law enforcement, at least everybody around me, was thoroughly disgusted with what happened with George Floyd. That was a murder by a uniformed police officer. And those of us in the profession, for all the right reasons, are devastated by what happened, are appalled, are disgusted. It does not represent many of the men and women who are in this profession for all of the right reasons. And it hurts us. It's painful. So I know in the state police, not only is it happening, but it's happening at every level. We are addressing it. The state police is taking a hard look at the 10-point reform plan. But we're a very progressive agency. We've been ahead on a lot of these reforms already before George Floyd's death, but now we're accelerating a lot of them. And it is incumbent upon every level of the state police, all of the command staff, to engage their people on all of these issues. Anytime something comes up, we hold command staff meetings, we discuss them, we discuss, we bring in speakers to discuss race and law enforcement. Curtis Reed has shown the documentary 13th to all the senior command staff of the state police, and we sat around and we had a long discussion about it. It's important that we train our people on the not so pleasant history of police in this country, and that they understand that that's kind of where a lot of the frustration and anger comes from. And police have come a long way, as you said, Professor, early on, but it comes from a dark past in a lot of arenas. So we absolutely discuss it, we absolutely engage, and we not just talk about it, but we talk about what we need to do better to prevent those things from happening in the future.
Chief, what about you and the George Floyd murder?
So I don't know an officer that I've talked about it who wasn't distressed about the actions, as well as the actions of the officers watching him do that, because they're just as liable as he is, in my opinion. I can't believe anybody that I work with or in policing, any of the good officers would stand by and watch somebody do that, because that's just not what we're here for. And ultimately, them being charged is the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I would say I have yet been able to sit through more than a minute or two of that awful video of the officer kneeling on George Floyd. But to me, it's almost more appalling what his three other officers did, and while they just stood there and did nothing, to me was just beyond shocking, and just added even more outrage to this awful incident. Bill, what about the Orange County Sheriff's Office post George Floyd?
It's been talked about not just internally within our office. It was right from the get-go. It was just sickening to see, and not just on a local level, on a statewide level. The Vermont Sheriff's Association, we came out immediately with a press release on this, on the whole incident, and then I'm privy to some stuff on a national level. And I can tell you right now, it's an outrage. The National Sheriff's Association, they're outraged too. The only reason I bring that up is I'm currently on the executive board, so I'm third vice president right now. So it's a horrific incident. It should have never happened, but unfortunately it did. When on a nationwide scale, you have over 375 million incidents that law enforcement goes to. And it takes, an incident like with George Floyd just to turn everything upside down. And, just hopefully that will come out of this is that the awareness will finally reach home to a lot of people, and to our leaders in law enforcement. When they see these bad apples within their agencies, they need to take action and remove them. It's right from the very beginning, I was disgusted.
Yeah. And I think the point you raised earlier about training, stick to your training and you'll likely stay out of trouble, applies really well there, because I doubt that the officer who knelt on him for almost 9 minutes learn to do that in the police academy. And I would imagine that his colleagues who stood there and did nothing, I would only imagine were told during their training that, look, if an officer is doing something that's clearly against policy or against the law, you need to intervene. And those officers, of course, failed miserably there.
I can tell you this. My law enforcement career started in 1984, so a long time ago. When I first started, and it wasn't in Vermont, it was actually in New Jersey. We told the person once to get in the vehicle, and if they didn't listen, the nightstick immediately came out, and their legs were hurting. I honestly, looking in the face, I never did it, but I've seen other officers, quite frankly, beat the crap out of someone that wouldn't listen. And I was appalled back then, because that's not me. That's not what I represent here, But over time, we see that change. The level of the de-escalation techniques. I'd rather talk with someone for an extra 5-10 minutes than fight with them. You get the same end result.
Okay. So let's see. Can you foresee any other effective alternatives to qualified immunity? Well, I'll take a stab at that. I have thought a little bit about this question. What might replace qualified immunity so that we didn't lose officers? Because I think that I truly believe that the police are essential part of our government, and I hearken back to say incident like September 11th when many of the first responders were NYPD, and quite a few of them gave their lives when the towers collapsed. So we definitely need the police. But what might replace qualified immunity if we're eliminated? There's two things that I can think of, and I'm sure there's others. One would be some type of police officer liability insurance, and I don't know if there's such a thing, but perhaps that could help address the concerns that have been raised tonight about you make a snap minute decision and you end up getting successfully sued, and then now you face financial ruin. Another potential option, I would think, would be through the unions and in their contracts for officers who are covered by unions. There could be an agreement that the employer, the municipality, county, or state, would provide indemnification in the event that there was a good faith effort at say, use of force that turned out not to be necessarily the best call. I don't know if any of you have other ideas or thoughts on what might replace qualified immunity if indeed the legislative efforts to end it succeed.
I think you hit on the two that have been, discussed in circles that I've been in. Either some sort of insurance policy, which I don't know if they exist. But I got to believe that there will be insurance companies that would do that, sort of like a malpractice insurance policy.
Right.
Or something in the collective bargaining agreement that would provide them with immunity, and or the union could provide insurance to all of its members somehow. So those are, I can't think of anything else other than that would replace it.
I think, like for me, the county would probably, have some real issues, because they provide, the basic insurance now, police coverage. And then But what's going to happen is that now you're going to open up the floodgates to a lot of trial lawyers, because they're going to be suing,
Damn
constantly.
lawyers.
Damn lawyers. You got those shark teeth out. Sorry about that. But
the other
no, serious. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to, I thought you were done, Sheriff. I apologize. The other issue too is, these are very probably expensive insurance policies and or coverage policies, whatever they may be. That will likely be passed on to taxpayers. I don't see people getting into the profession. It will be wrapped into, especially if you have unions negotiating contracts. If it's going to cost them $10,000 a year, they're going to want either that as part of their salary increase, or for the state or their employer to cover it as part of their employment, because it's a risk that their employer that they're taking. So I don't know, because we're not there, but I'd be worried that would be passed on to taxpayers in some way.
Well, and I would agree with you that to the extent there were such a policy, it would likely be very expensive, which would be difficult in this era of really tight municipal and state budgets, and those costs would likely get passed along. Let me get one more. Oh, so here's a question that is related to the investigations that may take place. So if someone is on administrative leave pending an investigation, what are investigators looking for? More pointedly, what are the types of offenses that most routinely result in termination?
Well, I can tell you for the state police, we have 3 tiers of discipline: Part A, B, and C. All the Part A ones are very serious, and you can be fired first offense, and B are less serious, and C are more administrative violations. But it all depends on the investigation that's being conducted. If you have committed a Part A offense for the state police, which is a fireable offense first time, it is likely a crime as well. So you will likely be investigated criminally. And so the criminal justice process will take place first. You will be suspended immediately. Any state police member that's accused of a crime and investigated for such is immediately suspended. And then that process will play out. The criminal justice process will, like anybody else charged with a crime. And then, internally, certainly the big ones for the state police are use of force, lying, misrepresenting facts. There are some big ones. There's about 20 of them that will likely get you terminated.
Well, when each of you were talking about investigations, I think Loretta and Bill in particular, you use the term major crimes. If there were a major crime, that investigation would lead to a different type of investigation. What would be an example of a so-called major crime? I mean, I think murder would be, but.
So yes,
Yeah.
So murder. We don't have the resources or manpower to be able to investigate that properly. So we would ask the state police to assist, bringing in their major crimes unit, their lab techs and all that good stuff that they've got. Kidnapping would obviously, that type of those type of big things. I mean, we do, I'm part of the SIU, so I can do sexual investigations and things like that. But for a major crime, we would need more help with than just say the 3 or 4 people that we have here. Would be what I was talking about.
Gotcha. Okay.
Professor, you talking about where a deputy does something wrong? You talking about crimes there?
Yeah.
So
right.
Yeah. Any type of any criminal offense, if they're found guilty in a court of law, they'd be terminated.
Absolutely.
And other incidents, depends you got to look at the circumstances. For example, if I have someone who, just for argument's sake, has been harassing females, a male deputy harassing females, I wouldn't tolerate it. I'd terminate him. So, I got to look at the circumstances on each event. And of course, if you're lying, I tell you right now, if you're lying, you're going to be done, because your state's attorney is not going to accept any cases. So that officer is useless. And who wants someone's going to lie anyway. So
could be a problem at a criminal trial if the arresting officer was not forthright and honest.
Absolutely. Just picture where that officer ends up investigating a bigger case, and it's a very severe case, and he gets on a stand there, and the defense attorney says, "Hey, have you ever been accused of lying?" So you hear the toilet flushing, the case going.
If the answer is yes, that's a problem for credibility and so forth. Yeah.
So attorneys,
time for one more question. So here's a fantasy question for you. So if the police had unlimited, if your departments had unlimited resources, how would you use those resources to make your respective communities safer, or in your case, Colonel, the state safer? Chief Stalnaker, what would you do if you had unlimited resources to help make South Royalton a safer community?
If we had unlimited resources, I would hope that we would have the people that would actually apply, have more officers that could do, educational programs, for the community, having some sort of outreach for people who, maybe have a drug issue that can come in, and we can try to find them help, things like that. More community programs, more community outreach, education. I'd love to start a junior officers program, or there's a community program out there that lets community members step into some training that law enforcement officers do, just to kind of give them a peek inside what we actually do from a day-to-day basis. I would love to start something like that. Just lots of education, lots of community involvement is what I'd love to see.
And to help maintain and build trust. Bill, you now have unlimited resources in Orange County. What would your priorities be?
What Loretta's talking about, what she spoke about also, I would definitely take a look at. There's a program out in Eugene, Oregon, that's been going on for the last 20 years. And it's actually some social workers working with law enforcement, and they'll take care of some of the quality of life issue complaints, not necessarily getting involved with where there's going to be violence or anything like that, but to have the resources to find out what's going on in your community behind the scenes. You take homeless people, for example. You ask yourself, how many people in your own community are homeless? But once you start getting the trust of your community, they talk to you and they tell you, hey, you got this person living in this vacant house or living behind it, and situations like that. So, with the sheriffs, I think we're the community, not just sheriffs, municipals. I could just see us being the community policing. And I'll be honest, I think like with the state police, they got the major crimes, the special units, and having the state police taking care of the bigger incidents that go on in Vermont. And I'm no disrespect to the colonel or whatever, but I could just see that in the future, the state police taking care of the bigger major crimes and having the special teams, and municipals and sheriffs taking care of stuff on a local level, the quality of life issues. So I think that would be, if I had all the resources in the world, I would look into, programs like that.
Colonel, what would you do with this for the state police?
Yeah, it's
and us members of the public, if you had unlimited resources.
right. So for the state police, our community is the entire state, so it's a lot more challenging. And I've heard the chief and sheriff say it a couple of times. We don't have, unfortunately, the luxury of some of our stations cover 20 plus towns, and it's very hard for us to get into the communities like a municipal agency would or a sheriff's department would. But we still try. I mean, we cover 200 towns, and we do our best, with given what we have. But I'll say this: we have 2 mental health workers embedded in our barracks. They were pilot projects, one in St. Albans, one in Westminster. It's been one of the best things that we've done to help us with mental health calls for service, preventing mental health calls for service for law enforcement. The reality is, mental health calls have increased tremendously over the last 10 years. Police are not equipped or trained to deal with mental health issues. And what we have to do better is trying to prevent people going into a mental health crisis from getting to a point where they're dangerous or they're armed and the police have to come, because mental health workers won't go in and deal with a situation with an armed person, crisis or no crisis. And so it's been proven to be very successful in those 2 barracks. It's helped prevent a lot of issues. It's helped reduce our calls. So if I had unlimited funds, I'd put multiple mental health workers in the barracks working alongside the troopers. I'd also, to the sheriff's point, talk about even adding social workers or drug counselors. There's something about working together that makes it more effective. Being in the same building, sitting next to each other, having the conversations with each other about the call that somebody just went on, and to Mr. Smith's house, and he's getting a divorce with his wife. He's schizophrenic. He's an alcoholic. How are we going to deal with the next call there? And putting all those minds together to come up with different solutions. And law enforcement, has changed tremendously. Most of our calls now aren't even enforcement related. They're society problems, they're drug problems, they're mental health problems. There are things that police are being trained in that are improving, but that we don't necessarily need armed police at. And so, and to achieve public safety, I think it's important that people recognize you achieve general community public safety, not necessarily through enforcement of laws. It takes a lot more than that to achieve that level of public safety. So certainly I would invest a lot more in those community partnerships, relationships, people, embedded workers in the barracks, and improve upon that. But to the sheriff's point too, the state police provide very specialized resources for very important crimes like homicides. We do have all of the special teams in the state for like our scuba, our bomb squad. So we do handle a lot of very specialized incidents that require very specialized training, and those are areas we need to focus on, because to both of their points earlier, they don't have the resources to manage a complicated homicide or a complicated kidnapping or crime that involves now a tremendous amount of technology investigation. Everything involves a cell phone. The state police has a technology investigation unit now that handles cell phones, computers, and devices that are helping us solve murders and very horrendous crimes. So that's kind of the other side of it. So I'll leave it at that. Well, I know we're running out of time.
The mental health aspects of law enforcement to me are must be one of the most difficult things that all of you have to deal with, and probably on an almost daily basis. And I mean, if I had the unlimited resources, that would be an issue that I would want to really try to tackle. Because I think you're absolutely right, Colonel. That's not necessarily a law enforcement problem. that is a medical problem, and given the way we pay for medical care, oftentimes people who are in desperate need of psychiatric care can't get it, or they can't afford their medicines, and then they spiral out of control. And then next thing, one of you get a call about someone who who's in desperate need of psychiatric services, but their condition has reached a point where they're a threat to themselves or others, and that is a very difficult situation. So we have, I think, time for one last quick question. So since, okay, how might you hold individuals accountable in law enforcement, given qualified immunity, and how that tends to protect officers from civil lawsuits? How else can you hold them? How else can we hold them accountable? In other words, as our final question. Chief, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, we have our criminal laws that hold us accountable. We have our policies, our ordinances that our personnel policies hold officers accountable if they're breaking those. You know, certainly you can be reprimanded. You know, there's, God forbid that one of my officers, you know, actually broke the law and was a criminal violation. But certainly we're not above the law. And, you know, to some extent we should be more than your ordinary citizen, because we should be the ones that are serving and protecting and showing that, you know, sorry, I'm not saying this right, but kind of being that mentor to the community and showing them that, you know, we're not above the law, and we have to do things just the same way.
Bill, what about from your perspective as a sheriff? How might you hold officers accountable given the defense of qualified immunity?
Yeah, looking at the facts and circumstances of an incident, and, you know, if the officer was acting in good faith and, you know, made a bad decision, then, you know, looking at educating and retraining or to that effect. But if it's an outright violation of law, then of course, you know, they'll be terminated. So you got to look at each set of circumstances in an incident, but then also once you get to the final end of it, it's letting the public know, you know, letting them know what happened, what the incident was all about, and what transpired, and, you know, letting them know at the time this is what the officer had for information, and that's why he reacted the way he did or she did. So I think just, you know, making sure we're thoroughly venting each incident as they occur, and then determining whether they acted in good faith or not.
Thank you, Sheriff. Matt, you have the last word.
Well, I agree with both the sheriff and the chief. There are, you know, law enforcement leadership with their overseers, which are generally people who are elected, either, you know, city council, a mayor, a governor, must hold the police officers accountable to policy. And, you know, if certainly there's the law. I mean, if a police officer violates the law, they will and should be held accountable to that. But if they're violating policy, agencies must have robust policy to govern how they function. And then you must hold your employees to that policy. And so if they're outside of the policy guidelines or the established policy, then they need to be held accountable, whether it's discipline or, you know, whether they're suspended or they are terminated. That's what needs to happen. And I agree with the sheriff. There needs to be public accountability to that, or citizen oversight of it, to ensure that there's trust, because I know that there's a lot of people in the public that don't trust the police to police themselves. And so we have to make sure that we're that we break that mold. And then so public accountability is essential in ensuring that people understand that if police commit misconduct, that they're held accountable to it, and that they're disciplined or terminated.
And then one would hope that would then deter others from heading down that same path. Well, we are out of time, and I want to thank Colonel Matthew Birmingham, Sheriff Bill Bohnyak, and Chief Loretta Stalnaker for joining us this evening, and really appreciate your insights. And stay healthy, and we thank you for serving and protecting us residents of Vermont. I want to also thank the audience, as well as Emily and Mariana for their assistance tonight. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.